This is an interview with Derryle Peace on January 6, 2010. We're in the new alumni building on the campus of Texas A&M University Commerce, Texas. My name is Jim Conrad. I'm head of special collections, and Dr. Shannon Carter, who's assistant professor of literature and language, is here.
Associate.
And this will become part of the LSTA and National Conversation and Writing programs and projects here. We want to thank you for taking time out this afternoon to talk to us about your recollections of old E.T. We usually like to start by asking where and when you were born.
Okay. Born May 3rd, 1952 in Dallas, Texas. I'm a native Dallasite and grew up there.
Can you tell me where you grew up in Dallas?
Yeah. I grew up, essentially I grew up in, the two terminologies for my community. Some people call it North Park. I grew up again, it was, things were still segregated at that time. My neighborhood is also known as not Elm Thicket, but Elm Thicket, like Deep Elm. I grew up in that area. It's an interesting area. It's near Love Field Airport. I grew up near Mockingbird, the old Coca-Cola plant. We could wake up in the mornings, my brother and I, through the Dallas Morning News, and we could smell the bread being baked at Manor Bakery, the old Coca-Cola plant. Actually, our house was on the flight plan, was on part of the flight plan for the old Braniff Airlines, long before Southwest Airlines. And so planes actually propeller planes actually flew right over our house. And so I grew up in that neck of the woods. My neighborhood, the border is Lemon, Mockingbird, Lover's Lane. And so it's a pocket. It was originally, part of the neighborhood was an all-black neighborhood. In the early 60s, our neighborhood actually enlarged because African Americans didn't live past University Drive, and then we moved. Then the whole neighborhood became pretty much a mixed neighborhood. So that's the area of town that I grew up in. Yeah.
Tell us a little about your father.
Yeah. I did not grow up with my father. My mother, actually my grandparents raised my brother and I. My mother and father were divorced when I was a baby. My mother died when I was 4. So my maternal grandparents raised my brother and I. We're probably, my grandfather had a 5th grade education. My grandmother had a 6th grade education. My grandfather was born in 1896 in Oklahoma. He was actually born on an Indian reservation. His mother was a full-blood Chickasaw Indian. And so he grew up on an Indian reservation. My grandmother was born in Linden, Texas, Cass County in 1900. And so here I am, a 4-year-old, being raised by a 56-year-old, and a 60-year-old grandfather. And so my grandparents raised us up. Probably, some people think, well, what a sad story, but it was probably not a blessing in disguise, but it was the best thing that probably could have happened to me, because I grew up in a very stable environment. The village was alive and well. I lived down the street from the church that I attended kindergarten. I attended Boy Scouts, Scouts Trustworthy, Loyal, Friendly, Courteous, Kind, Obedient, Cheerful, Brave, Clean, and Reverent. I attended Boy Scouts, YMCA. I knew nothing but family and love of community growing up. And so I grew up in a very God-fearing, a home that was, I always say, that was firm, fair, and consistent. And so that was my upbringing. My friends that I grew up with, that I went to kindergarten with, are still some of my best friends because we went to kindergarten, elementary, junior high, and high school together.
So what was your home church?
It was Bethany Baptist Church. Actually, I grew up 4 houses and across the street from the church. So church became very important in our lives. We attended church. I went to church every Sunday. I went to Sunday school. We have what's called Baptist Training Union, so I went to church at night. As a matter of fact, what's so interesting is that I never saw, I'm old enough to remember the Ed Sullivan Show. The only times I saw the Ed Sullivan Show was when the weather was so bad and they canceled church. The only time I saw the end of The Wizard of Oz, because it always came on at 5 o'clock on a Sunday and it went off at 7, I never saw the end of Wizard of Oz until I was an adult, because I was always in church.
You thought they were still in Oz.
I'm like, okay, what is the end of this story? But I never saw the end of Wizard of Oz until I was an adult, until I left my grandparents' home and came to college. Yeah, so it was just interesting enough, just a stable environment. And I tell people, I used to say this with some shame, but it's no shame at all. When I came to college, I didn't drink. I was a virgin, because in my household, my grandmother, she always impressed on my brother and I, you get a girl pregnant, the baby can't live here, the girl can't live here, and you can't live here. The day I find out, you have to move.
And you knew she meant it.
And I knew she meant it. Mm-hmm. And so I just grew up in that kind of environment, and there were things that were occurring in my neighborhood. I didn't have a clue they were occurring, because I was either at school, I was at church, I was in Boy Scouts, I was at the Y, and I played sports. And so I didn't have a lot of free time to get into mischief.
What were the names of your grandfather and grandmother, just for the record?
Yeah, my grandfather's name was Hardy Pruitt, Hardy. The last name is Pruitt. My grandmother is Rutha May, Rutha Mae. That's the second word, and her last name is Pruitt. So she was Rutha Mae Smith. Grew up again in Linden, Texas.
And what did your grandfather do for a living?
My grandfather, oddly enough, was a jack of all trades and a master of none. He worked construction, you name it, he could do it. He was a foreman at a construction company, and I grew up knowing how to tinker and do a little bit of everything: electricity, plumbing. If we had the old cast iron, old water lines and everything. And because the house was pier and beam, if the pipes froze, I can remember with my grandfather holding a light, him getting out of the house, him hacksawing the frozen part off, welding another piece back on. I mean, you name it, we did it. He added a room to the house. I mean, he could just literally do anything.
What brought them to Dallas?
They were married in Linden. They lived in Grand Prairie. The story goes that my grandparents worked on a farm in Grand Prairie. The guy who owned the farm made a pass at my grandmother. My grandfather hit him, beat him, and they fled. And they fled to Dallas.
Oh gosh.
Yep.
Wow. Interesting. So were they sharecropping there?
They were sharecropping.
Okay.
And this had to be, wow, this is the early, wow. This has got to be in the early 30s. Mm-hmm. Mm. If it was that late. And they moved to Dallas, and pretty much that's where they lived the rest of their lives.
And that was their community. Was your grandfather or your grandmother, either one of them officers, or I'm not sure what to say the word is, and in the church?
And my grandmother taught Sunday school. Mm-hmm. Oddly enough, if she was sick or if she was out of town, then I taught her Sunday school class as a kid.